Good day. Today I'm going to discuss Introduction to Special Relativity, Relativity of Time Intervals. This is found in Sears and Zemansky's University Physics with Modern Physics, Chapter 37.2 to 37.3. Now for the overview of the topic, we'll start with the history of relativity, the former four branches of physics, the conflicting ideas of classical physics, and electromagnetism. Then we'll follow with relativity of simultaneity. In here, we'll discuss Einstein's thought experiment, and finally, relativity of time intervals. Now, for the history of relativity. During the late 19th century, physicists thought that physics is complete. As to why? It is because they have these four branches of physics that can explain every phenomenon that they have encountered thus far. So they have optics to explain the propagation of light. They have acoustics, the propagation of sound, and classical mechanics, the Newtonian physics, the physics embedded on motion, and electromagnetism, a combination of electricity and magnetism. So for the last two, they have Sir Isaac Newton for the classical mechanics as an author, and also for the last one, James Clerk Maxwell combining the four Maxwell's equation, which governs electromagnetism. Now, at the heart of Newtonian physics is the frame of reference. Now, imagine you are inside a train. The train is moving without any disruption, completely still. Then, when you look outside, it's as if that the trees are moving backwards. But for someone that is outside the train, you can see that the train is moving. Now, this means that this frame should be equivalent. Now, as for the motion, someone inside the train, let me have my pointer first. So, imagine someone sees a ball falling inside the train. Then for an observer that is inside the train, it's just moving downward straight. But for someone, observer B, which is outside the train, he will see that this ball is moving on this path. Hence, we have this Galilean velocity addition to describe a motion for across observers. We have to have this Galilean velocity transformations, which is just an addition of the motion of the frame where it is contained and the motion of the object. Now let's go to electromagnetism. Now inside a vacuum, this Maxwell equations hold. So we have four Maxwell's equation on a vacuum. In a vacuum, I mean. Now let's take a look at this third equation. This is the curl of the electric field. Now if we get the curl of the electric field, so this is just adding another del cross here on the left hand side and not on the right hand side. Then using the triple cross product rule, which is for easy memorization, just call it back and cab. Then we'll have this. Now since the the divergence of the electric field in a vacuum is zero, since there's no charge that is contained. So this part is zero, and this thing is just equal to this one. But del cross B, this, the fourth Maxwell equation. Now substituting this one here, we'll get a wave equation. Sorry. So now the velocity should be factor of this one. We can just equate this with this one, and we'll have the velocity of an electromagnetic wave, which is coincidentally c. So c is not a random number, it is dictated by Maxwell's equations. That for any electromagnetic wave moving in a vacuum, it has to be moving at 299,792,458 meters per second without regards for the motion of the source. This mu naught is the magnetic permeability, and epsilon naught is the permittivity in the vacuum. So C is a requirement that must be met in order for Maxwell's equations to hold in a vacuum. Now, these are conflicting ideas. Take note that, for example, if we have this spaceship moving in the outer space, this is a vacuum. Or let's just assume that this is a vacuum. Now, the velocity of the laser for an observer that is outside is the sum of the velocity of the spaceship here and the velocity of the laser itself. This is what Galilean velocity addition taught us. But for Maxwell equation, it is not so. The velocity of the laser should also be c, since as we have derived from the previous slide, that the speed of an electromagnetic wave in a vacuum is equal to c regardless of the motion of the source. So, who's right? Is it James Clerk Maxwell or Sir Isaac Newton? But take note that James Clerk Maxwell's equation um, accurately describes electromagnetism, and so does Newtonian mechanics for um, physics regarding motions. Now, before we answer that, let's have this phenomenon that they have observed during that time. They have, example, we have a telescope here and we have a celestial object, be it a planet or star. Then we know that these celestial bodies are moving. So when we observe them, they already have moved to this position from here to here. So light still has to travel this distance, and by the time that it arrived here on planet Earth and we observe it using our telescopes, the celestial object has moved already to this point. So we have an apparent and actual positions of the celestial object. Now, they calculated the relationship between the apparent and actual positions in order to have an accurate measurement of the positions of the celestial object, and they found out that to base this Lorentz transformation mysteriously. So we have a mathematics that describes a phenomena, but we don't know the underlying principle governing this phenomenon, the physics of it. So physics is not complete now. So one of the theory is this luminiferous aether. So they thought that the outer space is filled with this luminiferous aether in which the the light has to travel. And because light travels on this luminiferous aether, it is having this contraction by a factor gamma and also beta. So this gamma and beta is like some kind of optical phenomena. For example, something like Snell's law, where light is bent by this luminiferous aether. Or what I'm saying is that it is analogous to light passing through glass. So it is the speed of light is being reduced or affected in such a way that it obeys this Lorentz transformation. Now, during this time, Michelson and Morley conducted the Michelson-Morley experiment, and instead of proving the existence of luminiferous aether, the result came out negative. So, luminiferous aether does not exist. And another group of scientists thought that there could be length contraction. Now, length contraction is like when you are riding a motorcycle and the air is pushing your face to the opposite direction, so it has something to do with Newton's third law of motion. And when these objects are moved, or particularly light, or an object moving close to the speed of light, then length, the atoms are affected because the effect is so strong. Imagine moving 0.866 the speed of light. That's very, very fast. And because of that, the atoms are contracted, hence explaining this x prime contraction, or the contraction of the space coordinates. Uh, but the problem with this one is they can't test it during that time. They don't have scanning electron microscopy or tunneling electron microscopy to view these atoms and the so-called length contraction of the atoms. So it cannot be proven nor disproven at that point in time. Solve this puzzle. Another scientist, the name of Albert Einstein, um, published a paper on the electrodynamics of moving objects, also known as Special Theory of Relativity. Now, it started with an thought experiment, the relativity of simultaneity. Now, in this thought experiment, imagine a train is moving past by you, and by the time that the train, at the time that the train has moved, in which you are at the middle of it, two lightning struck both ends of the train. Now, since this distance is just the same to this one, light has to travel the same distance, and by basic algebra, we know that um, the time it takes for light to be observed by you is the same. But for someone that is inside the train, since he is moving towards this point, as you can see here, then he will have light will reach him first from the front because he is moving towards the front, and the light from the back will reach him at a later time because he is moving away from it. So one phenomena is observed differently by two observers. That's relativity of simultaneity. The events are not simultaneous depending on the motion of the observer from the source of the phenomenon. Now, the consequences of one of the consequences of this is relativity of time intervals. Now, let's derive the relationships of time intervals. Now, imagine there's a very huge mirror in the outer space, and we observe it using our telescopes here. And also, some scientists have boarded on an what's this spacecraft, or whichever you want, if you want to observe it in the spacecraft, and some scientists stayed on Earth. Then we know for sure that if we shine a laser from point 1, it will reach point 2 at some time t naught. And this distance is just the speed of light times the time it took for the light to travel from point 1 to point 2. And let's call this distance d. Now, for someone that is inside the spaceship, maybe it's you or the scientist, light will travel on a diagonal path, this path from points 1 prime to 2 prime. You can think of it as in think of like we have a full moon. You are moving and you are moving fast or slow, or doesn't matter. You're moving perpendicular to it. It's as if that the moon is following you. That's why we draw this horizontal line. It's moving towards point 2, but at the same time it is following you. So we have the velocity additions and it is diagonal. But we know for sure that the distance of the of 2 prime and 2 from points 1 prime and point 1 is just the same. It's ct not or d here. Now, we can establish a Pythagorean relationship. Or so we have this hypotenuse minus one of the side, and we square this, just equal to this side. So just a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and then we subtract a one of the side on left hand side and right hand side. And you know what I mean. So using basic algebra, we arrive at this equation. Further algebra, we have this. We factor out t squared. Now we divide both sides by c squared minus b squared. We arrive at this. And we divide the numerator and denominator by c squared. And we square it. And finally, we have the relativity of time intervals. Now, this is for synchronized clocks. And if we did not synchronize our clocks, then we'll have to put delta. We'll have to take note when we started recording the phenomena. Now, what's interesting on this is the time for someone that is in Earth for the event to have the time frame or the example if we recorded the phenomena using camera or whatever you recording device you use, then example if the speed of the spaceship is such that is zero point 0.9 speed of light, that's just a hypothetical, and we know for sure that t naught is less than the time frame that we observe on the spaceship. So that means that it's as if this person here observes the phenomena in, in a slower manner. So that means that the time frames or the video length of recording is different. One records the video quite longer and the other shorter. That seems like time is flowing differently for different observers. And that is the concept of relativity of time intervals. Now, for the next topic would be length contraction as explained by Special Theory of Relativity. They have length contraction before, but that length contraction is due to physical forces. But this one is a consequence of combining the constancy of the speed of light and the principle of relativity. So if you like, you can read an advanced topic and derive the expression for length contraction. Follows the same pattern as we use with the relativity of time intervals. So thank you for listening and see you on the next one.